Let me ask you this. Let me approach this another way. If a state decides to require a voter to prove who the voter says he is or she is, do you consider that racist? How about ballot harvesting? And I heard earlier you were talking about letting the tribal elders collect ballot. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where the parties, and believe me, both parties will do it and probably are doing it, pay operatives to go out and help people with their ballots and collect their ballots. Are you okay with that, or are you against that?
I don't think it's an either-or situation. I think it depends on what the conditions are, what the rules are, but making it easier for those who want to participate in elections to do so with safely and securely, I think it's worth.
What you just watched was only a brief preview of one of the most striking moments we've seen in a Senate hearing in quite some time. Coming up is the full exchange between Senator John Kennedy and Stacey Abrams, and it's something else. Kennedy walks in armed with straightforward, no-nonsense questions and methodically dismantles the talking points. Abrams, who's been making headlines by labeling Georgia's voting law as Jim Crow 2.0, finds that claim put under a microscope. Question by question, Kennedy strips away the rhetoric and exposes the gaps. It's precise, relentless, and a textbook example of how clarity can cut straight through political spin.
Ms. Abrams, can you hear me? I don't know where to look. I hate these Zoom hearings.
Yes, sir.
In terms of voter confidence in our electoral system and perception of voter integrity and and election, let me start over. I'm sorry. In terms of the confidence that Americans have in their electoral system, do you think we're better off having an election day or an election month?
I think we are better off having a process that allows every single American the opportunity to participate in elections. And given that the initial notion of an election day was based on an agrarian economy that no longer exists for millions of Americans, and given the fact that we have a number of Americans who are limited in their access because in states like Georgia, there is no paid time off for voting, I think we have to make every opportunity to make voting accessible to every American. There is no other entity that
let me
would
stop
be
you,
denied.
I've got a bunch of questions before you get off the subject and get me off. So you're okay with us not knowing, say, weeks or months after an election who the winner is?
Yes.
Okay.
We have had times in this country where we have not known.
Talking about the Georgia bill, help me understand. And I'm not interested in a 30,000-foot view. That's not meant to be a criticism. I'm speaking to myself, I guess. I'm not interested in platitudes. Tell me, you're against the Georgia bill, I gather. Is that right?
I'm against certain provisions of it, yes.
Okay, and I think you've called it a racist bill. Am I right?
I think there are provisions of it that are racist, yes.
Okay. Tell me specifically, just give me a list of the provisions that you object to.
I object to the provisions that remove access to the right to vote, that shorten the federal runoff period from 9 weeks to 4 weeks, that restrict the time that a voter can request and return an absentee ballot application, that eliminate...
Slow down for me, because our audio is not real good here.
Certainly.
Could you start over for me?
Certainly.
Thank you.
It shortens the federal runoff period from 9 weeks to 4 weeks.
Okay.
It restricts the time a voter can request and return an absentee ballot application.
Right.
It requires that a voter have a photo identification or some other form of identification that they're willing to surrender in order to participate in absentee ballot process.
If I can stop you, that's where they're going to not comparing signatures, but to voter ID?
Yes, sir. And as Ms. Eiffel has pointed out, we would become only the 4th state in the nation to require voters to put at risk their identity.
What else? What else?
It eliminates over 300 hours of Dropbox availability.
Okay, what else?
It bans nearly all out-of-precinct votes.
Bans what? I'm sorry?
It bans nearly all out-of-precinct votes.
Okay.
Meaning that if you get to a precinct and you are in line for 4 hours and you get to the end of the line and you are not there between 5 and 7 p.m.,
Okay,
you
what
have to
else?
start all over again.
Is that everything?
No, it is not. No, sir. It restricts the hours of operation because it now, under the guise of setting a standardized timeline, it makes it optional for counties that may be may not want to see expanded access to the right to vote. They can now limit their hours. Instead of those hours being from 7 to 7, they're now from 9 to 5, which may have an effect on voters who cannot vote during business hours during early voting. It limits the voting
Okay, I get the
hours.
idea. I get the idea.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this. Let me approach this another way. If a state decides to require a voter to prove who the voter says he is or she is, do you consider that racist?
Not at all, sir. Voter identification has been a part of the American theory of democracy almost from the beginning.
You're okay with it?
I support voter identification. Yes.
Okay. How about ballot harvesting? And I heard earlier you were talking about letting the tribal elders collect ballot. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where the parties, and believe me, both parties will do it and probably are doing it, pay operatives to go out and help people with their ballots and collect their ballots. Are you okay with that, or are you against that?
I don't think it's an either or situation. I think it depends on what the conditions are, what the rules are, but making it easier for those who want to participate in elections to do so with safely and securely, I think it's
So
worthy
you're
of
okay with ballot harvesting?
No, sir, I did not say that. I said because that is a term of art that encompasses a wide range of behaviors, and even your example.
I'm sorry, but I'm trying to get down from the platitudes and understand what you're for and against.
But sir, what I'm for is
help me with this. Let's suppose that the Republican Party wanted to hire people to go out and knock on doors of voters and say, have you voted yet with your mail ballot? And they say no, and then the operatives are told to contact the voter and say, let me help you with your ballot. If you have any questions, I can even suggest who you might want to vote for. And after you vote, I'll collect the ballot for you and you make it easy. Is that okay?
Sir, I'm both an attorney and a former legislator, and it is not simply the words that you're saying.
I'm an attorney and a current legislator, and I might trade places with you, but keep going.
And so my point is, as you and I both know, that the context, the rules, and the structure matters. Now, in the very narrow circumstance that you just described, if there are no controls and if it turns into buying votes, of course I object to that.
Okay.
But if you look at the piecemeal components that you're describing, and if we are talking about how do we make it easier for voters to participate in elections, I'm not certain what that looks like, but what you described in this very specific and narrow construct, it sounds like you're in violation of a number of different rules, not the least of which is buying a vote.
All right, let me ask you one last question. Our chairman's really indulged me here. Do you think it was a smart thing for President Biden to do when he called everybody who supported the Georgia bill a racist?
I think that this bill is grounded in racial animus. I think that the language that we are using to describe.
Can I ask you how you know that, madam? I mean, it's an honest question. How do you know that?
Because for 15 years, the Republican Party of Georgia not only sanctioned but celebrated its vote by mail provisions. It was only after voters of color for the first time in 15 years successfully used those provisions in favor of the party that they disproportionately support that those rules changed. It is that for years, for more than nearly 2 decades, we had early voting hours that supported voters that were perfectly fine. It was only after communities of color used those provisions in
But why doesn't that hurt black people and white people and brown people? This is what.
Let's walk through what actually happened. Kennedy opens with what should be an easy, straightforward question: should elections be decided on a single day, or stretched out over weeks? Instead of answering, Abrams veers off into a long explanation about America's old agricultural roots. An agrarian economy? That's just an academic way of saying farming society. Her point is that election rules were designed around farmers needing time in the 1800s. That response completely avoids the question. It's a classic deflection. She can't really argue for an election month without it sounding absurd, so she changes the subject. Kennedy doesn't let it slide. He presses her again, are you comfortable with the public waiting weeks, or even months, before knowing who won an election? And her answer is a single word, yes. That moment is stunning. She openly accepts prolonged uncertainty as acceptable. To most normal people, that sounds crazy. Elections are supposed to end with results, not confusion that drags on indefinitely. That one answer reveals a lot about priorities, and it has nothing to do with efficiency or clarity. Then Kennedy sharpens the focus. He tells her he's not interested in slogans or feel-good language. That line alone speaks for millions of Americans who are exhausted by vague political talk that never actually explains anything. He challenges her directly, you called this law racist, now explain how. Give specifics. So she runs through her complaints. The runoff period is shorter. Drop boxes are limited. Early voting hours are adjusted. And absentee ballots now require identification. You can argue those policies are good or bad, but calling them racist is a much bigger claim. A 4-week runoff. ID for mail-in voting? These rules exist in plenty of states run by Democrats. Labeling them Jim Crow 2.0 stretches the word racism to the breaking point. Then comes the key moment. Kennedy asks her outright, if a state requires voters to prove who they are, do you consider that racist? She's trapped. She knows most Americans, including most minority voters, support voter ID. It's part of daily life. You need ID to travel, to buy alcohol, to handle basic financial tasks. So she can't say yes. Instead, she says she supports voter identification. That's the contradiction. If she supports voter ID, how can a law that includes voter ID be racist? The entire argument collapses right there, but Kennedy keeps going. He turns to ballot harvesting, paid activists collecting ballots from voters. Not the voter, not the postal service, but campaign workers. He asks if that's acceptable. Again, no clear answer. She hides behind technical language, calling it a term of art, and saying it depends on the rules. But it's a simple question, should paid political operatives be allowed to handle other people's ballots? She refuses to say no, which tells you exactly where she stands. Finally, Kennedy addresses the bigger accusation, that anyone who supports this law is motivated by racism. Abrams doesn't defend the claim directly. She pivots again, saying the bill is rooted in racial animus, another vague phrase that implies malicious intent without proving it. Accusing your opponents of racism based on assumed motives rather than concrete evidence is a dangerous leap, and Kennedy exposes that. So here's the takeaway. Kennedy asked clear, common-sense questions. Abrams avoided answering them directly, contradicted herself, and leaned heavily on abstract language instead of facts. She says she supports voter ID while branding voter ID laws racist. She won't condemn ballot harvesting. And she claims insight into the moral intentions of her political opponents. This wasn't a debate, it was a reveal. And Kennedy accomplished it by sticking to simple logic and refusing to be distracted. That's my take. What do you think? Did you notice the contradictions too? Drop your thoughts below.